Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental, I think, to how modern life feels: rapid change.
Yeah, it's everywhere. We'll be leaning heavily on Alvin Toffler's work, Future Shock mostly, but other sources too, trying to get a handle on how all this flux impacts, well, you and society as a whole.
Exactly. And we're not just revisiting old ideas, are we? It's about seeing how those insights from Toffler feel now.
Right, and the core question really is this. When change feels like it's just too much, too fast, how do we cope? How do we adapt?
Or what happens when we don't adapt, when we fail to keep up?
That's the key.
Now, usually when we think future, we jump straight to, the shiny new tech, flying cars, AI, that sort of thing.
Sure, hardware.
But what made Toffler's work so resonant was his focus on the human side. How do these massive shifts actually affect our day-to-day, our relationships?
Even our sense of self, it's the human experience of tomorrow, but it's happening right now, really.
And it's worth remembering, this feeling isn't totally new. People have felt overwhelmed by change before.
Absolutely. Thinkers have compared moments like this to huge historical shifts. Sir George Thompson, for example, he likened it to the invention of agriculture. I mean, talk about a fundamental change.
Wow. Yeah.
And John Diebold argued this tech revolution is maybe even more profound than past social upheavals. Sir Leon Bagrat saw the power of automation early on, too.
These weren't just small tweaks. They were like complete rewrites of how humans live.
Exactly.
And that really hits home with Toffler's 800th lifetime concept, doesn't it?
It does. It's a powerful image. Imagine humanity's lifespan divided into lifetimes.
Yeah.
And only in the most recent ones has our relationship with basic resources just completely flipped.
For thousands of years, agriculture was everything. Now, in places like the U.S., it's under 6% of the workforce, yet feeding hundreds of millions. It's a total inversion. So when you think about that kind of shift, you have to ask, how does that change how you think about things like, say, sustainability?
Right. It's profound. And the shift from farming to factories and now to what Toffler called super-industrial society. It's happened incredibly fast.
10,000 years for agriculture, a few centuries for industry, and now this.
Now this phase where, as Uthant put it, our decisions shape our resources. It's a different ballgame.
Okay, so to really grasp the impact, Toffler points to two big forces, right?
Yeah, basically two sides of the same coin. First, the sheer speed of change itself, the acceleration.
And second, this growing feeling that everything is temporary. Transients.
And these two together, he argued, lead to future shock.
Right. So let's unpack that first one, the accelerative thrust.
Yeah.
It's not just a gut feeling that things are faster.
No, there's real data behind it. I mean, we all feel it, right? Doctors trying to keep up, professionals feeling buried under new software or regulations.
Yeah, that feeling of constantly playing catch-up.
But Toffler gave some stark examples, like predictions back then that the world's urban population would double in just over a decade.
Double. It's
Yeah.
staggering.
Think about it. It means building a whole new city for every single existing city on Earth in about 11 years. That's the scale of change.
It kind of feeds itself, doesn't it? This acceleration.
Absolutely. Technology builds on technology. An idea leads to an application that spreads, and the spreading itself sparks more ideas. It's a loop.
And the time it takes to go through that loop,
Yeah.
it's shrinking.
Exactly. Frank Lynn's study showed this really clearly with innovations like frozen food or antibiotics. The gap between discovery and widespread use got much shorter over time.
It's just like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
It gets bigger and faster.
Right. And it's not because we're suddenly smarter or working harder. It's the systems we've built. R&D, communication, they're designed to speed things up.
And knowledge itself is like the fuel for this engine.
Totally. The rate we're generating knowledge is just mind-boggling. Toffler's timeline really shows it. Centuries to get the first 100,000 book titles before 1500.
Okay.
By the 1950s or 60s, we were hitting that number in months.
Months.
And by the mid-60s, days.
Wow. So this constant flood of new information, it means you basically have to keep learning, right? Just to stay afloat.
It's a survival skill now, not just a nice to have. Something for you listening to really think about in your own field.
So what does this constant newness do to us? Psychological?
Well, that's the crux of it. A faster rate of change means more situations where your past experience just doesn't apply anymore. You're constantly facing the unfamiliar.
And that takes a toll.
It seems so. Scientists studying the mind-body connection show external change forces internal adjustments. And there were warnings, even back then, from people like Christopher Wright and Eric Erikson, that this acceleration would seriously test our limits, our adaptability.
You even see it in cultural clashes, right?
Right.
The French reaction to American drugstores Toffler mentioned.
Yeah, it sounds trivial maybe. A soda fountain. But it represented a different pace, a short-order culture replacing the slower bistro life.
And that clashed with really deep-seated expectations about how life should feel.
Exactly. It shook their durational expectancies, as Toffler put it. How long things should take, how quickly things should change, when reality mismatches those deep expectations.
It creates stress, friction. Can you think of a time, maybe in your own life, where a small shift in pace caused a surprisingly strong reaction?
Oh, definitely. We all have those moments, I think. We learn these rhythms early on, and when they're disrupted, it can be genuinely unsettling.
Okay, so that's the speed, the acceleration. What about the other side? Transients, things feeling temporary.
Right. And Toffler starts with, well, our stuff, physical objects.
The paper wedding gown image is memorable.
It is. It captures this idea that our relationships with things are becoming shorter. Think disposable diapers, throwaway packaging, fast fashion.
Stuff designed to be used briefly and then discarded.
Exactly. Ephemeralization, he called it. Things becoming more fleeting, less permanent in our lives, like we're just borrowing them.
And it's not just the cheap stuff, is it? Even bigger things, like buildings, environments.
Right. The vanishing past. Familiar places disappearing quickly. Louis Auchincloss lamenting how New York City kept changing.
And sometimes it even makes economic sense to build things not to last.
Often, yeah. Technology moves so fast. Why build something to last 50 years if it'll be outdated in 10? Cheaper sometimes to tear down a relatively new building, say, an apartment block in Miami with old AC, than to upgrade it.
Which leads to ideas like modularity, building things in pieces.
Like temporary parts within a more permanent frame. Cedric Price's Think Built idea, with plug-in apartment modules. It's like Legos, in a way. Temporary bits in a bigger structure.
And renting things fits this pattern too.
Absolutely. Renting cars, tools, furniture, it reduces that long-term commitment. And interestingly, it can even accelerate change.
How so?
Well, if you're IBM or Xerox renting out equipment, you have a huge incentive to keep innovating, right? You don't want to be stuck managing obsolete inventory. You pour money into R&D.
That makes sense. Now, people often talk about planned obsolescence, things designed to break.
Right. And Toffler acknowledged that happens, but he argued the bigger picture is functional obsolescence. Things become outdated not just because they break, but because something better comes along so quickly.
Driven by science, by knowledge advancing.
Precisely. Product lifespans are just shrinking dramatically. Think Smith Brothers cough drops used to be around forever. Now, that kind of longevity is rare.
Supermarkets are a great example. Thousands of new products every year.
And most vanish pretty quickly. In fields like pharma or electronics, 6 months can be a full product life cycle.
Wow, 6 months.
It creates this environment where fads can be engineered and spread incredibly fast. The line between a fad and a normal product gets blurry.
It feels like we're living in the era of the temporary product, made for temporary needs. So, like, is the latest TikTok dance challenge just a symptom of future shock?
Maybe. But seriously, when you add it all up, disposables, temporary buildings, modular stuff, rentals, it points to this inescapable trend. Our connection to physical things is becoming shorter, less permanent, more ephemeral.
Okay, but it's not just things, it's places too, right? This transience affects our connection to where we live.
Definitely. Toffler talked about the new nomads. People with these crazy commutes, flying back and forth weekly, ranchers flying daily, even teenagers jetting off for orthodontics.
Leaving behind that traditional idea of a single, fixed home base.
Right. And you see it in professions, too. High turnover. Corporate gypsies, he called executives who moved around constantly. Professionals, military families.
I'm decorating my car. That quote says a lot.
It does. Even students going to college far away contributes to this sense of mobility.
And attitudes towards moving vary culturally, don't they?
Hugely. Toffler contrasted the French reluctance to move even short distances with the American norm, where relocating for a job was often expected, even seen as positive.
But moving is stressful. It takes a toll.
Absolutely. Clifton Fadiman's account of getting physically sick after moving, that resonates. There's a real process of adjustment, initial disruption, finding new routines.
And sometimes people don't fully adjust.
Right. It can be tough. I remember when I moved cities, even though it was exciting, that initial feeling of being adrift was surprisingly intense.
And if you move frequently, it can affect how much you invest in a community, right?
Yeah, that sense of why plant a tree if you'll never see it grow? Less incentive to get involved locally if you know you won't be there long.
So the whole idea of home starts to shift from a fixed ancestral place.
To something more fluid. Home is where you find it, maybe. Even universities started caring less about geographical origins in admissions, reflecting this change.
So just like with things, our connection to places becomes more temporary, forcing us to make and break ties faster. It speeds everything up.
Exactly. Which brings us to people. How transience affects our relationships. The modular man.
He starts with examples like spring break crowds,
Yeah.
temporary gatherings.
Intense but fleeting connections. And this raises questions sociologists have wrestled with. Does this fragmentation lead to alienation, that longing for deeper involvement?
But there's a counter-argument, isn't there? That in dense urban life, trying to have deep relationships with everyone is impossible.
Right. Harvey Cox echoed similar here. Maybe those more impersonal modular relationships are actually necessary. They free you up to choose the deeper connections you invest in.
That's an interesting point. But how does Toffler explain people who seem to, thrive on constant change in connections?
Well, he also questions if we sometimes overly romanticize traditional long-term relationships. They came with their own constraints, right? Heavy demands, maybe less individual freedom.
So it's a trade-off. But the general trend seems to be shorter relationship durations.
That's what he argued. His long-stemmed flowers analogy. The really long-lasting relationships becoming exceptions in a field of shorter contacts.
Though some things still help people connect quickly in new places, like kids, neighbors.
Sure. Especially for homeowners in suburbs, those mechanisms can work. But the overall trend seemed clear to him.
And this applies to work relationships, too.
Definitely. More job specialization creates more types of jobs, but technology often shortens the lifespan of those jobs. The airline flight engineer example is classic, a role that appeared and started vanishing in just 15 years.
And new jobs are constantly being created.
Yeah?
Things nobody imagined decades ago.
Yeah.
Computer programmers, data analysts.
Right. And even when a job title stays the same, the content of the work changes rapidly. People cycle through roles faster.
He talked about turbulence in the executive world, too. People leaving, taking teams with them.
Yeah, a constant churn, creating an unsettled and unsettling environment, as he put it.
It even requires learning how to end professional relationships efficiently. Disrelating, he called it.
It sounds cold, but it reflects the reality in business, academia, other fields. If friendships are based on shared interests, and interests change fast,
And then friendships might become more temporary, too.
it follows logically. And think about schools' high teacher turnover affects teachers' sense of accomplishment and maybe students' sense of connection.
But Toffler ends that section with a really provocative thought, doesn't he?
He does. He challenges the easy assumption that temporary relationships must be superficial.
Could we actually learn to form deep connections faster in a high transience world?
It's a fascinating question. Maybe depth and duration aren't always linked in the way we assume. Something to really ponder as we navigate this.
Okay, so we've got temporary things, places, people. What about organizations themselves?
Right. Toffler contrasts the old model stable departments, fixed roles, long-term careers within one company.
You joined, you knew your place, you knew the structure, it was predictable.
Pretty much. But now, organizations are in constant flux. Titles change, jobs morph, departments appear and disappear. It's much more fluid.
Driven by mergers, acquisitions, just the need to adapt to a constantly churning market.
Exactly. Companies have to constantly reposition themselves, and these reorganizations are often huge, affecting everyone, even top management.
He mentioned the disruption caused by reorganization in government agencies, too, like HEW. It's not just corporations.
No. And a key feature of this is the rise of temporary teams. Task forces, project groups.
Assemble, solve a problem, disband. Especially in science and tech, right? It fuels the innovation.
Precisely. George Kosmetsky made that distinction. Routine versus non-routine organizations. He predicted the non-routine ones, built on these transient teams, would dominate the workforce.
Because the old bureaucratic model just can't keep up. Too slow, too rigid.
That's the argument. Warren Bennis said bureaucracy worked for the stable industrial age, but it fails in rapid change. Information gets stuck.
So the organization of the future, the super-industrial organization, looks different.
Yeah, more like adaptable temporary systems, problem-solving teams with diverse specialists pulled together for specific tasks.
And managers act more like coordinators, helping these different experts connect.
Right. Roles are flexible based on skills needed now, not fixed job descriptions. People develop quick, intense working relationships.
But maybe with less loyalty to the specific group because you know it's temporary.
Exactly. It requires an ability to connect fast, collaborate intensely, and then move on.
This leads to the idea of adhocracy. Fast, fluid, information-rich organizations.
And these organizations need a different kind of person than the old organization man.
Toffler called this new type associative man.
Yes. Less about company loyalty, more independent, comfortable with risk, seeking recognition based on skills, not just rank.
Self-motivated, moves between teams, brings ideas. The team is a temporary vehicle, not a lifelong home.
That's the picture. A very different relationship to work and the organization.
Okay, final area of transients. Ideas themselves.
Yeah, this is fascinating. He starts with how quickly public figures rise and fall. The model Twiggy was a prime example. Huge fame, but very brief.
Even heroes have shorter shelf lives. The kid thinking John Glenn was too old.
Right. Our relationship with these vicarious people mirrors our real relationships, more flow through, shorter duration. It reflects the pace of change in the world.
And this constant change challenges our basic understanding, our mental models of how things work.
It has to. V. Gordon Child's point. Our mental maps need some accuracy to reality for us to survive and function.
But when reality changes so fast, the maps go out of date quickly. Yesterday's truth is today's fiction.
And even experts struggle. Toffler quotes scientists just drowning in new papers in their own narrow fields. How can anyone keep up?
It affects everything. Child-rearing theories change constantly. Public perception of big ideas like psychoanalysis shifts dramatically.
You're just bombarded with new images, new information across politics, economics, medicine. Old ideas decay faster. Knowledge itself feels impermanent.
Even books, the blizzard of bestsellers with short lifespans.
Add to that the engineered messages, the advertising hundreds of messages a day, most ignored but still contributing to the noise.
Language changes faster, new words pop up, gestures change meaning.
Even art. Whole artistic styles replacing each other rapidly. Cubism, kineticism, rapid turnover.
It's a huge cognitive load, isn't it? Trying to process and make sense of all this incoming, ever-changing information.
It really is.
Wow.
Which leads us directly to the core problem Toffler identified. The limits of our adaptability. Future shock.
He starts biologically with the body's reaction to novelty, the orientation response.
Right, the OR. It's automatic. Your heart rate changes, breathing, brain waves, whenever something unexpected happens.
Happens constantly, below consciousness.
But repeatedly triggering it, constantly being in that state of alert, that can be damaging. René Dubos talked about the wear and tear on the body.
And Toffler saw signs of this adaptive breakdown, this future shock in society.
He suggested things like rising drug use, mysticism, vandalism, nihilism, apathy could all be signals of people being overwhelmed, their decision-making processes breaking down under the stress of too much change.
Because there's a limit, a kind of optimal range of stimulation.
Seems so. Berlin's work showed this. Too little novelty, you get bored. Too much, you get stressed, confused, maybe even break down.
Culture shock is a good analogy he used. That feeling of disorientation in a new place, even without obvious danger.
Yeah, and information overload at work shows it too. Studies found accuracy drops when people have to process too much, too fast.
Life's a mix of routine and novelty, programmed and non-programmed decisions.
And too much of either is problematic. Too much routine is deadening. Too much novelty is anxiety-provoking, potentially leading to psychosis.
When people feel overwhelmed, some react by looking backwards, idealizing the past.
Yes, reversionist tendencies. Wanting simpler times, small towns, pre-tech societies, often alongside demands for change elsewhere, ironically.
And others try to find one simple answer for everything, the super simplifier.
Right. Desperate attempts to find a single key to unlock complex problems. These coping mechanisms, denial, over-specializing, reversion, oversimplification, often just make things worse if you don't have clear values.
And the consequences of future shock, confusion, anxiety, anger.
Fear, tension, irritability, apathy, social withdrawal, even a blurring of reality, Toffler argued. The Matala cave dwellers became his symbol for that ultimate withdrawal.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis. What about the cure? How do we manage this? Toffler looked at controlling technology first.
Yeah, he argued the old anything goes approach just wasn't viable anymore. Technology is too powerful, the choice is too complex.
We need to ask harder questions before we deploy new tech.
Questions like, how will this affect the rate of future change? Will it increase transients? Novelty? Choice overload?
He floated ideas like a technology ombudsman, independent assessment,
And an environmental screen for ecological impact. Thinking ahead.
even exploring things like Oliver systems, those intelligent assistants. Raises huge ethical questions about control, doesn't it?
Definitely. The big takeaway was the urgent need for social sciences to catch up, to really study the consequences of the tech we create so rapidly.
Which flows into his strategy of social futurism, addressing that feeling that society is just out of control.
Right. Big processes like urbanization, conflict, they seem to run wild, and well-intentioned plans often backfire.
Urban renewal displacing people, welfare creating dependency, highways causing more traffic. That feeling of society's gone random.
Exactly. And just relying on technocrats, on experts planning top-down, isn't working. It's too short-sighted. The death of technocracy, he called it.
And the reaction to that failure can be just focusing on the now. Instant gratification.
Yeah, abandoning planning altogether. But Toffler argued, we need better planning, a different kind. One that recognizes how interconnected everything is, economics, lifestyles, subcultures.
Meaning we need new ways to measure society's health, beyond just GDP.
Yes, indicators that capture the experience of change, of novelty for different groups.
He's optimistic about new forecasting tools, like Delphi, cross-impact analysis.
But stressed it wasn't just about prediction, it was about imagining multiple possible futures, combining science with imagination.
He liked the idea of social brainstorming, getting lots of different people involved in generating ideas.
Because often there's no single coherent vision, just conflicting plans.
So we need new ways to set goals collectively, moving beyond the experts.
Towards anticipatory democracy, broader participation. He suggested things like a presidential staff for the future, citizen social future assemblies using simulations and games.
Getting everyone involved in shaping where we're going, consciously guiding our own evolution.
Recognizing our power, our impact, and understanding that values shift too. From scarcity to affluence, from material needs to psychic gratification.
The psychologization of the economy, experiential industries becoming key.
And grappling with new family forms, changing relationships, the challenges of stability in a high-change world, even ideas like trial marriage.
He also tackled choice. Is more choice always better?
He questioned that. Super-industrialism creates immense diversity in products, media, lifestyles, not standardization.
Look at supermarkets, cars, magazines. Incredible variety.
But this leads to overchoice. So many options, it becomes hard to choose, hard to form an identity.
Lifestyles become organizing principles, ways to navigate the options. But not everyone has equal access to those choices.
Right. A key challenge is using technology to expand choice for those trapped in limited circumstances.
But this fragmentation of values, this multiplication of potential selves, makes integration harder.
Which brings us back to managing the stress. The Holmes and Rahe scale quantified the impact of life changes.
So we need strategies, personal and social. Creating stability zones, crisis counseling, introducing change gradually.
Enclaves of the past, simulations for training, finding ways to balance change with continuity, as John Gardner said. Creating new social rhythms to anchor us.
And finally, education. Just as mass education prepared people for the industrial age.
We need a new educational revolution for the super-industrial age, one focused on the future.
Teaching kids how to anticipate, how to adapt, moving learning beyond the classroom, maybe back towards the home, using technology, revising curricula for future relevance.
Embracing diversity in learning, and crucially, the strategy of futureness, giving people advanced information.
Forewarned is forearmed, helping people form a future-focused role image to make sense of the present.
Exactly, preparing people not just for the future, but to actively shape it.
So wrapping this up, we've covered a lot. This deep dive into Toffler really highlights the accelerating change, the increasing transients in, well, everything.
Things, places, people, organizations, ideas.
And the result, future shock, the stress of hitting our adaptive limits.
And for you, listening, our learner, getting a grip on these ideas is, we think, really crucial. It's about equipping yourself for what's here and what's coming.
Yeah, it might feel a bit overwhelming hearing all this. The sheer scale of it.
It can, but Toffler's point, and ours, I guess, is that understanding these forces is the first step. Engaging with them proactively. That's how you move from just surviving to maybe even thriving.
Right, which leads us to that final thought we wanted to leave you with.
Given everything we've discussed, this relentless acceleration, this constant reshaping of our world, what single skill or maybe mindset do you think will be the most critical? Not just to cope, but to really flourish in the decades ahead.
Something to mull over. What's your key to navigating the future?